All right, good morning, Mission. Good morning, good morning. Man, it's so great to see each one of you. My name is Arol McFadden. I'm the lead pastor at Mission Bible Church, and I'm on the Manuka camp. Wow, this is nice and tall. I feel like I'm hiding behind it. I'm the lead pastor at Mission Manuka, and one of the things that we are just absolutely thrilled with is our connection to Morris. You are people that are inspiring all of us over in Manuka. I was telling Garrick, where's Garrick? Garrick the drummer. Garrick? Okay, sorry to embarrass you, man. But we like over there, when things happen at this campus, we are celebrating over there. We were in a couple of different meetings and like, oh yeah, did you hear the new drummer? Like, there's a new drummer? Yeah, a new drummer. His name's Garrick. I'm like, oh, Garrett? Like, no, Garrick. I'm like, Garrick. I will never, ever forget that. And so that was one of the coolest things. So we're just absolutely just doing backflips about the fact that God is doing things in this congregation through you, that some of you are people that have been invited by friends and neighbors, and we're just absolutely stoked about that. Some of you are you're like, okay, I'm like, this is the year that I'm going to start not just pretending, or not just showing up and pretending like this is something that I'm getting stuff from, but I'm actually going to be leaning in on how do I live this out with the people around me and my community and my neighborhood. Who could I bring into this congregation? And so we're super pumped about that. We're one church, two locations, and we could not be more and more proud and more grateful that you're led by someone so amazing as Pastor Eric, right? Yeah, Pastor Eric. Let's give it up for it. I'm saying that because he's going to watch this later, and I really want to impress him. Okay, so now here's the thing. This whole series, we actually came about with this idea of series, and we were coming up with different names, and I'm like, let's call it Shaped. And the reason, and it was a hard sell, because it's an idea from shaping a surfboard, which I know is super common in Grundy County, but it's something that growing up was something that I was kind of familiar with. I grew up in Southern California, 10 minutes from the beach, went to the beach all the time. And so when you go from Southern California to the Midwest, there's three questions that everyone asks you. One, have you ever felt an earthquake? And the answer is, yeah, all the time. It's not that big of a deal. You guys got snow days? We had earthquake days. That's because, you walk to school, you feel an earthquake. Sweet, we're out of school. You got to walk home. Second thing was, have you seen any stars? And yeah, some of them. But the third one that everyone asked, this was uncanny when I got to Chicago to go to college, was, do you know how to surf? And I had to tell everybody, no. I grew up and went to the beach all those years, and I never learned how to surf. And this dude on my floor from Delaware was a surfer. And he said, this isn't right. You grew up in Southern California, you didn't know how to surf, you never learned, and I'm from Delaware. And so we went on a spring break trip to his house, and he taught me how to surf, and that was super, super fun. And then he took myself and Reese Amstutz, your worship director's dad. We went on a Costa Rican surf trip, and it was super awesome. And so, but to this day, I'm not really drawn into surfing. It doesn't excite me, but the art behind it blows me away, because you're taking a section of foam and you're shaping it into this aerodynamic, engineered device that can defy physics and be buoyant enough to take a human body through a tube of water. I mean, it's unbelievable. And so I loved all the pictures, all the videos that I could ever see of someone who is a shaper, someone who, they took that block of foam and one stroke at a time, before that square rectangular thing all of a sudden converts into this surfboard. This aerodynamic device to take a human body through a tube of water. And I love that. And so when we were talking about Bible verses, we talked about the fact that we wanted to compile this massive list. We had tons and tons of Bible verses, like near 100 Bible verses that we just asked different staff members and people that we love and respect, what are the verses that have shaped you in your life? And we got all these Bible verses, and then we had to take all of these, we had to whittle it down. And our whittling down process was, we want to give this summer an opportunity for our church to be shaped by Bible verses, that they could actually take and memorize it each week, that we would be preaching on one at a time, and that every campus, both campuses, would have a chance to let this come into their heart and become something that is absolutely shaping to them. For me, I'm someone who stinks at memorization. How many of you really stink at memorizing stuff? Okay. My people. All right, this is great. So when, for you might be like me, but Bible verse memorization is something that we don't enjoy doing, because I grew up in church land, and it was always memorizing Bible verses. I'm like, this is horrible. And they're like, but you get a gold star. I'm like, Still not good enough. I mean, I don't care. I mean, I don't want to, it hurts my brain. And so I'm not a great reader and I'm not a great memorizer. And then I went to high school, and at every high school camp, in order to get 1,000 points for your team to win, your whole team's got to say the memory verse. I'm like, this is so stupid. This is the worst part of camp, memorizing Bible verses. It's so dumb. Next week, tomorrow, not next week, tomorrow, we have 600 kids that are going to be on the campus over in Manuka for our day camp called Spy Kids. You know what we're going to force all of them to do? We're just a bunch of hypocrites. You know why? Because every one of those goofy Bible verses that I was forced fed from a kid on up stayed. And to this day are still shaping me. I'm still shaped by John 3:16. One of the first Bible verses I think that was the first Bible verse. For God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whoever believes in him will not perish but have everlasting life. That was huge. As I got older, I remember Ephesians 2:8-10, talking about it's, for you are saved by grace through faith. And this isn't something that you did, it's a gift of God so that no one can boast. I mean, that blew my mind, the fact that we had the ability our salvation is a gift. It's not something that I earn. When I would screw up, before I would even screw up, I remember like 1 Corinthians 10:13 being a verse that said, because in junior high I started getting tempted all the time. And then that Bible verse said, no temptation has attacked you except for what's common to everyone else, and God is faithful. When you're tempted, not if you're tempted, when you're tempted, he will give you a way out so you can endure it. Do you think that helped a junior high guy, high school guy, 40-year-old guy? You bet it did. And when I failed and I felt like God's going to just throw in the towel on me, I remember Philippians 1:6, being confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will be faithful to carry it on for completion. God's not going to give up on me. And when I feel like this whole world is just messed up, there's no hope, I remember Revelation 21:5, where Jesus says at the end of things, when he's come back and he's reconfigured the whole planet, and he's the king. We don't have any more politics. We don't have any more drama or carnage or tragedy. He says, see, I've made all things new. That verse I hold on to. So I stink at memorizing. In fact, as I was saying those Bible verses, some of you who are good at Bible verse memorization are like, you screwed up a word. I caught it because I'm awesome. Yeah, good for you. You know what God doesn't care about? Me getting the words perfect. But what he does care about is me hiding his word in my heart. Shh, every Bible verse. Shh, shaping me. Shh. So when I hit hard times, shh. When I feel like everything's just going to garbage, shh. When things are going wonderful, shh. Scripture has shaped me. What's shaping you? So that's the idea. And so when we get to the Bible verse that we're going through today, it is no different. And the Bible verse is going to be Romans 5:8, that you've got the Bible verse to memorize, which is great. And if you have a physical Bible, this whole series would be a great one just to underline in your actual physical Bible. If you don't have a physical Bible, no sweat. Some of you could even take notes on your memory card even. That's kind of a cool idea that I had right now. I didn't think too much about. But take these in. Now this is, Romans 5:8 is the memory verse, but I want to give a little bit of context behind it. And it starts in verse 6. This passage, Paul says this, you see, at just the right time, when we were still what? Powerless. Well, at just the right time when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, though for a good person, someone might possibly dare to die. Let's just pause there for a second. I think that's hilarious. This is I don't know what the people were like back in Paul's day, but this sounds kind of current here. Like if someone's like, would you die for someone? Well, I don't know. Is it a good person? Yeah, they're a good person. Yeah, I might die for a good person. Okay, what about a really holy person? Nah. I mean, that's just kind of very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person. It's like, okay, yeah, you guys, you're super religious. That's awesome. You go to be with your God or whatever. But for a good person, yeah, I'd be inclined to do that. He says, very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, though for a good person, someone might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates, this is the Bible verse, God demonstrates his own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Now, this is the thing. We're going to be talking about three realities, three ways that this Bible verse shaped me. This is very autobiographical. This verse probably would have different ways that it could shape you, and as you memorize it this week, it may. But I'm just going to tell you three ways that this verse changed my mind or shaped my mind or set me up to go forward in my faith differently because of the fact that because of what God uses it to say. Here's the first reality that I see in this verse. Good people don't go to heaven. The first thing I see in this verse right off the bat is that good people don't go to heaven. Now, some of you are like, that doesn't sound right, but it probably is. This is probably a trick. Well, no, it's not a trick. This is something that our theology, honestly, we can believe that passage that I memorized, Ephesians 2:8 and following, that it's by grace that we're saved through faith, that it's a gift of God, not by works, so we can't boast. We can believe that. But at the end of the day, what ekes into each one of our outlook is the idea that, but Jesus saves the good ones, or the people that he knows will be the best. And he doesn't save the bad ones. Or the people that go to heaven are the good ones. I mean, like if you do enough good, you're going to go to heaven. That's kind of whether that's in the church or not, that's in the common understanding of America. Who goes to heaven, who goes to hell? If there is a heaven, if there is a hell, the good ones go to heaven, the bad ones go to hell. So all you got to do is be a little bit better than the worst, and boom, you're good. And the reality is that Paul says, no, good people don't go to heaven. The reality is that there aren't any good ones. There's no good. Like all of us are equally like distant, disconnected. We're disconnected from God. Good people don't go to heaven. There's no good ones, and that's the bad news. As a sinner, we're dead in the water. As a sinner, there is no hope in ourselves. And that's why other translations translate the beginning part when it's at Romans 5:6, when he says, you see, at just the right time when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. The New Living Translation, I love how it translates that verse, so much so. That's part of the memory verse for next week for the kids, and we changed it from the NIV to the NLT because of the way this word that the NLT uses. You see, at just the right time when we were still useless. When we were useless. When we were powerless. Whenever I think, you may have gone through something in your life where you felt powerless, whether it's physical or it's something that's happened to your family, whether you've had a disease and you just couldn't will yourself out of having that disease, whether you went through a divorce and you were trying to stop it, but it was happening anyway. Whether you were something happened where you were in a car accident, and even though you can slow-mo things like super slow motion as things are happening right before a car accident, you couldn't stop it. For me, I always go back to March 31st. March 31st of 2019. That was, and actually it's March 31st, 2019, and this. I love this. Some of you guys have seen this before. This is in my office. It's one of those beautiful things that I get to adorn my office with. And actually, if you look at it, it's got like film on the inside because it used to hold water. This used to be in my living room. On March 31st, 2019, I woke up at 3 in the morning because I thought I smelled smoke. We had a fire downstairs in the fireplace the night before. It had gone out 2 hours before we all went to bed. And I remember locking the house up and checking the fireplace before going to bed. Went up to bed and woke up at 3:15 in the morning or so. And just smelled a little bit of smoke. But it didn't feel like awkward or weird because, again, we had a fire in the fireplace earlier that night. But something just felt wrong. Went downstairs and I look around. I'm expecting to see a fire still going in my fireplace. But there's no fire in my fireplace. I'm like, that's really bizarre. Where's the smoke coming from? I look over at the oven and I'm like, no, the oven's not on. But it's like hazy. It's not like smoky, but it's like just like a little like hazy inside the room. It looks like if Benji Sartorius walked in the room and he had the haze machine, boom, that's kind of what it was like. I'm like, okay, there's something off here. And I looked back at the fireplace and I saw that just underneath the mantle, there was this band of orange light. I'm like, oh, that's not good. So I walked on over to the orange light, and I realized that I thought maybe my mantle was on fire. My mantle wasn't. I realized that just underneath the mantle, there was an exposed section that exposed the wall behind the fireplace. And within the wall behind the fireplace, there was a fire raging. There was a fire inside the wall. It started at a fracture point where a small little ember got through the firebox of our fireplace. So even though the fire was out on the surface, there were no glowing embers on the surface, one had gotten down and had nestled itself in something that just basically continued to smolder for 5 hours before starting a fire and starting that fire up the inside wall of my house. And all of a sudden I start freaking out. I start screaming. Like, I don't know if any of you have any junior high daughters. That's about what my voice sounded like. I was screaming for Julie and the kids to wake up. And again, in my head, I'm like, this is a manly voice. Come on, kids. Honey, get out of the house. It's on fire. But it sounded, again, more like a junior high girl. And so I'm like, get out of the house, get out of the house, go, go, go. And then all of a sudden, I'm like, I got to get this out. And so I look over. I'm looking for anything that I could put out a house fire with. And I realized the answer was before me. So I grab this, I take the flowers out, and I run on over. And I throw it in there. And it does nothing. And so I run over to the sink and I fill it up with water. Like, kids, Julie, get out of the house, get Bear. Bear's our dog. It's not a real bear. Run on over. Still nothing. I'm doing this back and forth. And Julie's like, have you called 911? I'm like, no. So then I called 911. You want to know the kind of people that call 911 to call the fire department to put out a fire? The people who realize they can't put the fire out themselves. This was the reminder that I could not put the fire out myself. And all of a sudden, so now I'm still trying, kind of holding on to this, and I'm calling, hi, I've got a house fire. Kids, get out of the house. Shh. Yeah, 712 Joint Drive. Kids, go, keep moving, make sure you got Cohen. No, shh. And I'm still trying to put the fire out as I'm talking to the person on the phone, trying to get someone there. And then Julia's like, Arol, it's too late. We got to get out of the house. Get out of the house. I'm like, okay. She's like, you got to go right now. And I'm like, I can't. I'm in my boxer shorts. And I realized if I go out, it's again, 3 a.m. I'm going to run out there. I'm going to be in my boxers and nothing else. All the guys in the neighborhood are going to see that and be royally jealous. And so I couldn't have that. So I ran back upstairs. I grabbed a hoodie, grabbed some pants, and I just ran out there. And when I got to the outside, I saw my house was just on fire. It was crazy. But the craziest part of it was this. I can put it out with this. I keep this in my office. When I'm sitting and I'm talking to someone who's like, I know I've got a problem, but I can take care of it. I know I've got an issue with my sin, but I could handle it. I'm like, oh, really? Oh, really? Hold on a second. Let me tell you a little story. Because what you're doing is this. And this verse conveys that. Listen to what he says. He says, but God demonstrates his own love for us in this. While we were what? Still sinners. He wasn't saving people who could save themselves. He wasn't like, okay, here's the thing. I'm going to save you. You're going to go to heaven. But I want to coach you so that you get good enough for me to be able to do that work, okay? So if you start taking some of these steps, I'm going to check in. And if you qualify, we're going to certify you for heaven. It's going to be awesome. Nowhere in the Bible do we have that. And yet we live that out as if that's the reality. What we see in Scripture is nobody is qualified. Everyone is disqualified, and the entry level to salvation itself is realizing my house is on fire and I do not have the means to put it out on my own. I am dead in the water if I don't get help. No good people go to heaven. Instead, we recognize that Jesus saves the damned. Jesus saves the ones that are broken and dead in their sin with no ability. You know, here's the thing. This is the amazing thing, that God actually stepped in and did that. That's why this is such an important Bible verse to memorize, because we drift away from that thinking and we think that we're saved because we're living a little bit better than the worst person, or that God accepts us because we're moral people, or because we're moral people we stay saved or something. And that's just the goofiest thing in the world if we memorize this Bible verse. Because this Bible verse reminds us that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. That's the first thing. Second thing is that there's nobody too bad to rescue. See, because thanks to this verse, I realize that it's impossible to save myself. I not only get to see how bad I am, but I also get to see how savable other people I thought were bad are. I not only get a good self-awareness fact that I am someone who absolutely does not have any capacity to save myself. I absolutely need Jesus, but I see other people differently too. Because it's really easy to say, I can see why God saved me. I mean, it didn't take that whole lot of work, but there's some people that, whoa. I mean, you'd have to be like God to save that person. we see in this verse the reality that is exactly what God is after. The good news is that there's no one too bad to rescue. No one has done too much to disqualify themselves from God's forgiveness, not a single person. And you can go through the whole Bible and you see that God is consistently not only saving the wrong people who've done too much bad, but then using them to do amazing things for his glory. That's like his trademark move. So if you think that your theology says that well, God saved me because he knew that I was going to do great things, and that's why he saved me. Well, first off, you're wrong. You're dead in the water from this Bible verse. But secondly, you've shut your eyes to the fact that there's people in your world that he wants to save that you've already written off as going to hell, and there's nothing you could do about it because they're too messed up. Well, they are too messed up. That's why they need Jesus. That's why you need Jesus. And that is what we see in this passage. There's nobody too bad to rescue. Because again, what does he say? God demonstrates his own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, who died? Christ. So does it take a God-sized miracle to save people? 100%. Do you have people in your world that are like living right now in a way that you're like, I doubt very greatly that God could do something in their life? Sure. That sounds like the exact person that he's after to impact. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Memorizing this verse gives us the assurance that Jesus' blood really does cover all sins, not just the PG-rated ones, not just the entry-level sins, not just the sins that you're comfortable with because they're common to you, they're domesticated by you. A lot of times when we look at the world, like people that are struggling with different kinds of sin in our world, it's super easy to be super judgy as Christians of people who are struggling with stuff that we can't relate to. We look at those people and we're like, oh my gosh, man, how messed up are they? They're going to hell in a handbasket. And then if we're confronted about our own sin, we're like, well, yeah, but like everybody struggles with that. Everybody does that. I mean, it's not great. God's not stoked about it, but everybody wrestles with what I wrestle with. Scripture calls us to have a different perspective, recognizing that all sin breaks us away from God, even the ones that we've domesticated. And he forgave us freely. And his grace is so great that he did that now we can look at all the other people that we were like, you are way far from God. But guess what? So was I. This is for you as well. This is for you as well. One of the things that I love about that is that was something that was taught to me by a good friend of mine that if you heard me talk enough times, you've heard his name, Victor Gamboa. I love Victor Gamboa. I just talked with him the other day. He's doing awesome. He's down in Tennessee now. But when we were growing up, he was a guy that I invited to church. It was easy for me to invite Victor to church because I had to teach him how to do a paper route. So we were like 12 years old at the time. And so we're like learning the paper route together. And so he was just like asking what I'm into. And so I'm comic books, skateboarding, and I go to church. That was basically my life at the time. And he's like, oh, I like comic books. I kind of want to get into skateboarding and I hate church. I'm like, sweet, well, you should come to my youth group. It's awesome. And so I invited Victor. Victor comes to youth group, and he's weirded out because he grew up in a background where his parents had like a light religious background, but just enough to make him go, the church is full of a bunch of hypocrites. I don't want to have anything to do with them. And all of a sudden, he's now in this room with all these other junior hires, and we're singing songs, and we're praying, and he's like, this is the weirdest thing in the world, that junior hires actually want to follow God and love God. It's just bizarre. But then Victor gets saved. And it was like you lit like a M80. I mean, it was just like explosive. He wanted to start bringing his Bible to school. And I was like, Victor, don't do that. This is a public school. He's like, I know, exactly. I know, but you're not supposed to do that. It's like, who told you not to bring a Bible to school? Nobody, but everyone knows you're not supposed to. Victor bring it, and like we would sit there, and we sat right in the middle of the G13 gang area of our junior high. It's like all the guys that were training to be high school level gangsters, and the G13 area had all these guys and girls. I'm just like, this is the dumbest thing that we're doing. But that's where Victor wanted to sit and read his Bible at lunch and get made fun of, and people ask him questions, and he would do it anyway, and he didn't care. And I'm like, this guy's crazy. I was so impressed by it, though. I was scared to death because I thought it was going to kill us, but I was so impressed. But I was impressed by that. I wasn't impressed by the next move that he made, which was Jason Subiati. Jason Subiati, okay, all of us in junior high were like, let's say that we're about this high, this tall. Jason Subiati was like 6'5", and he was big, and he wore Slayer t-shirts. Now, some of you wear Slayer t-shirts, so you know what I'm talking about, or you have family members who wear Slayer t-shirts. Basically, I love Satan, and I want to share his wonderful plan for your life. That's Slayer, people, okay? And Jason Subiati was hardcore Slayer. He was big time into Slayer, and he would just like get around, but not only that, Jason had no friends because he was known to beat up kids. I mean, it's like every 80s cliche movie had a Jason Subiati. He was the real deal. At Stephen M. White Junior High School. And Jason Subiati would just beat up people. Teachers were intimidated by him. Our principal was scared of him. And so Victor's like, we should invite Jason to youth group. And I'm like, that's a terrible idea. Like, why would you do that? Have you heard what he did to Eduardo? Yeah, I know. That he needs Jesus. I'm like, yeah. But like maybe like we should get like military to come in here and share the faith. You know, maybe it's not us. Jason's like, I think we should invite Jason Subiati. All right. So we go on over, and I let Victor take the lead because, like, you know, he just became a Christian, so I know he's going to heaven. And if something should happen. And so Victor says to Jason, hey, what do you do on Tuesday nights? And he's like, why? He's like, well, we got this youth group thing at our church. And Jason looked at him like he had just, I don't know. He just couldn't believe that he was saying the word church, like he said a bad word in front of him. He was like, what? He says, yeah, we got this thing on Tuesday nights called Vision. We'd love for you, would you like to come? And Jason was like, why? Well, I don't know. I just thought you might want to come. Like, Arol and I will go. Arol will probably find a ride for you. I'm like, what are you doing? And I'm expecting him just to like turn us down right there. So I'm like, the pain is going to be over real quick. And then he's like, okay. And I was like, oh no. And so I call my youth pastor. I'm like, I don't know what to do with this. And my youth pastor's like, sweet, I'll pick you up, I'll pick Victor up, and we'll go pick up Jason Subiati. And I remember going to Jason's house and just being terrified. And he comes in, he gets in the car, and we take him to youth group. And I'm sitting there in youth group, and everyone else is terrified in the room because they've heard of him. Even the people who didn't go to our school heard about Jason. And so but I remember sitting in the room, and you got this guy with a jean jacket with all of these like terrible patches, like awful, blasphemous patches all over it. 6'6". I mean, this guy was like, I want you to know where I stand with the Lord, you know? And he's sitting there, and he's all like covered with all this stuff, and he's got his combat boots on. And I just remember thinking, I can't believe that Jason is sitting in our church. And I looked over at Victor, and Victor's just smiling. You know why he was smiling? Because he got it. There's no good people that go to heaven. And there's nobody that's too far to rescue. There's no one who is too far from the reach of God for rescue. And the gospel got planted in Jason Subiati's heart. And he came a couple times, and then he graduated, then he moved. And he's one of those guys that I'm trying to Facebook stalk and track down to this day. Because I know the gospel's planted. I don't know what happened after that. But I wouldn't be shocked if one day when we're in heaven, we're walking around, you're going to see this dude, and you're like, that's totally him. That's got to be him. Jason Subiati? And you're like, yep. I would love for that to happen. The reality is, God demonstrates his own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Who is it in your world that would take a Christ-level miracle to save? And are you saying, do you have the guts of Victor Gamboa? Or have you been like a neutered Christian like me? Who was like, oh, no, not that person. There is nobody too bad to rescue. Now, when I think about all of this, I just kind of like go, this just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Because you've got, on one hand, you would want God to rescue the qualified and the good, and yet he doesn't. He says we're all bad, and he actually is the one who qualifies. There's nobody who's beyond his rescue. And so as I'm looking through this passage, basically there's only one explanation that makes sense of this madness, because it's not logic. I mean, in fact, Paul later on stated in his letter to Corinth that none of this makes sense. It doesn't make sense that God would act like this, that God would, it would make sense for God to seek and save the righteous or the good, and he doesn't. He rescues people who recognize they're bad. And so the logic is gone. And why would God want to do that in the first place? Why would a good God, how in the world could a good God humble himself and wear himself down to the point that he'd be willing to do that for people like you and me and the people like Jason Subiati? How in the world? There's only one explanation, and that's love. And that's what we see in this passage. You see, at just the right time, when we were still powerless, Christ died for who? The ungodly. Okay, so let's go from 6 on. You see, at just the right time, this is God's plan. At just the right time, when we were still powerless, Christ died, not for the righteous, but for the ungodly. Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, though for a good person, someone might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates his own what? Love. Not just his perfect plan, not just his holiness, not his wrath. All of that would be appropriate. But Scripture says that God demonstrates his own love. Love is not what I can get out of you, it's what I can give to you. God demonstrates his own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. You know, a better translation of the Greek word that the NIV translates as demonstrates is proves. God proves his own love. You know, throughout our lifetime, we're always like wondering if the people that we love and who love us, if they actually will stand the test of time. Will this marriage last? Will this friendship go the distance? Will the people that I have close to me right now be with me when it matters most, when I'm in the trenches? And honestly, even though we may not say it out loud, we're saying it subconsciously. I want you to prove it. I want you to prove it. And when people in our world, and all people in our world do this, when they let us down, when they betray us or they just disappoint us, we feel like, how can you possibly come back from this? Because you've proved that you're untrustworthy. You proved that you don't truly love me. Or you proved that you don't have the capacity to go the distance the way that I need you to. And the amazing thing about a Christian is this. In spite of all the questions I have about faith, in spite of all the questions I have about the Bible, one of the most amazing things that I know for a fact is that I'm following a God who saw fit to not just tell me that he loves me, he proved it. He didn't just write me some assurance, he proved it. He proves his love to me. And it didn't say that God demonstrates his own love for this. It doesn't say God demonstrated. It says God demonstrates. God's proof of his love for me is ongoing. What he did on the cross is this ongoing proof. And Paul indicates that in a world where we have every evidence that people will only be with us so far and through so much, God's love started for us long before we ever could say sorry and after we completely distanced ourselves from him. His love started when we were completely unlovable. I think that's so amazing. God's love didn't start when he fell in love with us. When I'm doing a wedding ceremony, when I'm just kind of getting to know the couple better, I'm like, tell me your love story. When did you guys fall in love? And they say, oh, it was, we both got on eHarmony and then love happened after. Or it's like, or we met at this location, or we were at a bar, or we were at a family event, or we were at this or whatever. Maybe not the family event, that sounds creepy. It was, we met in some way, shape, or form, and that's where the love story started. But the amazing thing about God's love story for us is that God's love story didn't start with us when we were lovable. It started when we were enemies. His love didn't start when he fell in love with how amazing we are. His love started when we were completely unlovable. No love on earth can compete with that. And when you are somebody, and this is why memorizing this verse is so huge, if you have that in your heart, you're walking around with the recognition of how messed up you are, and you can be honest about that. That lowers your defensiveness when people call you out. When people call you out and they're like, man, you got some serious issues, you can say, you only know the half of it. You know what God knows? He knows more than I know, and he still loves me. You can know how messed up you are, and yet how God's grace has covered that, how that's for everybody. And that the thing that is the marching orders of God with his interaction with you and I is his love for us. And you get to see what he did for you. When I got out of my house at 3:15 in the morning, and we had finally called the fire department, and this all happened in a matter of 45 seconds to a minute and a half. There's a lot of details that were scrunched into a little bit of time. But I remember standing out there going, when's the fire department going to show up? When are they going to show up? When are they going to show up? When are they going to show up? And then they show up. And it felt like it was 4 years. It was 3.5 minutes. Boom, they get on out there, and they're unrolling their all of the hoses, and they're getting everything ready. And they're and it was when I got outside that I realized the scope of the fire that I did not see when I first woke up. I did not realize that the sound I thought was wind behind the wall that I was sleeping up against was actually the fire creeping up from the first floor to the second floor and creeping over into the attic that was now stretched over my wife and I and all of my children. When I got outside, the bonfire that was my house was such that the fire department had to get up on the roof and saw into the roof to expose the fire that was inside and get water in there from that side. Afterwards, when we walked through, it was just like a bomb went off in our house. It was like one of the craziest, most scary, saddest thing I've ever seen in my life. And it's weird, because I've always appreciated firefighters. I think a lot of people wanted to be a firefighter when they grew up, or you see them, you're like, oh, that guy. And you hear it all the time, where when everyone else is running out of a fire, they're running in. You've heard that? And you always appreciate and respect them. There's a difference. When they've saved your family, or they put out the fire in your house, it gets personal. And all of a sudden, when you see a firefighter, you have a different approach. I'm walking through Jewel, and I see one of the firefighters from Manuka that was there on the scene. And I want to hug this guy. I mean, this guy's like a big Ryan Seavers-sized guy. And I want to hug him in the produce section. Why? So I know what they did for me. When I have that verse shaping my outlook, all of a sudden, I get this ongoing reality of how loved I am by God, that he would do that for me. God demonstrates his own love for us in this, that while I was still a sinner, he died for me. I'd like us to finish the service off by standing and reading a verse that many of you have memorized. I'd like to start off by reading this verse first, because this is the one that we're working on this week, and I want to challenge you. Put this on that clipboard and read it, read it, read it. If you're a terrible memorizer like me, ask God to get it in your brain some way, shape, or form, even if the words are jumbled up. But let this be something that informs your outlook and your perspective. Let's read this together. 1, 2, 3. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. Amen? May we live with the reality of that love. You are dismissed.